Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever you are, whenever this is, to this second part on how to teach clients to stop existing and embrace living a meaningful life. It's a lecture in the series of CBT inspired interventions. An essential component of working with client in CBT-inspired interventions in general, but very importantly when it comes to behavioral activation and leading a meaningful life, is to work with clients on thinking about goals. What would they like to achieve? And these have to be kind of goals about how they would like to behave, not goals about achievements. I would like a different job, would like a house, because over these goals we have no control. A goal could be, I want to apply for at least 3 jobs a week. Now that's a goal that's within your control. But a goal, I would like to have a well-paid, nice job, is not under anyone's control. So it's important to make goals that are linked with what is under our control. So we need to have clearly defined goals, short, medium and long term. Preferably goals that are connected to our current avoidance and that we can incorporate into activity scheduling and that can be monitored. Sometimes there might be competing goals, and then we choose the ones that are kind of best countering the avoidance. Goals could include a return to normality, or to embrace a, between commas, normal functioning as part of society. We have to assume that everyone has the ability to become part of society, can integrate with society either by having paid work, voluntary work, and we should not assume that a life of avoidance is the optimum that a client can achieve. The ability and the willingness to set goals is an important requirement before we can work with clients in CBT-inspired interventions, and especially when we're working with behavioral activation. Without a client's buy-in in that, it will be very difficult or even impossible to work in a CBT-inspired model. My colleague, Phil Zimbardo, identified 7 paths to a meaningful life. And some of them might be more applicable to some clients than others, but I find it useful to review them with clients. The first one, use time wisely and well. Often people talk about not having the time to engage with mental hygiene. But if you then look at how they prioritize their time, they may have quite a bit of time filled with what I would call empty activities, watching rubbish on television. Fiddling away with their mobile phones, being busy on social media. Although these activities can be distracting, it's not really a wise and well use of time if we, as a result of that, don't have time to invest in mental hygiene. The second one is love a lifetime of learning. The essential bit of that is that we're never too old to learn new things. We're never too old to learn new skills. And embrace the process of learning. I mean, learning goes from not being able to do something and making many mistakes to gradually reducing the amount of mistakes and becoming a bit more competent. If we come down like a ton of bricks on ourselves, if we make mistakes while we're learning, that's an indication that we do not embrace the process of learning. Nurture your passions. If you are passionate about something, try to incorporate that in your life. Don't try to repress it. Don't say to yourself, I'll have time for that later on, when I'm retired, when the children have left the house. Make time for it now and nurture your passions. Don't accept yourself as a shy person. Transform shyness into social engagement. In other words, build up social activities in your life that, between commas, force you to interact with people. And it might be necessary that you need to remake your image of yourself. Don't be afraid to be different from the rest. Being different is not a bad thing. Become a positive deviant. The last one, train yourself to become an everyday hero, which means that we go out of our way to engage in random acts of kindness to other people. Now, it's often with clients who might not be interested in doing the formal behavioral activation, I use this as a guideline and then to say, look, on which of these would you like to work this week? And that helps clients to gradually engage their activity pattern. Action precedes emotion. I can't stress that enough. We often wait to feel better or more motivated before doing something. But by allowing negative feelings to dictate what we do or don't, it will only make these negative feelings more powerful. It sounds perhaps counterintuitive, but when we are depressed and lethargic, we have to increase meaningful, pleasurable or satisfying activities. When we're anxious, we need to increase doing the things that make us afraid. I mean, in both situations, don't go overboard. When you're anxious of being in public, don't organize that your first attempt at being in public is holding a public speech for 1,000 people. But when anxious and you want to avoid social situations, plan that you'll engage more with social situations so that your mind can learn that there is nothing to be afraid of. This is what we're trying to work with. Depression and anxiety create fatigue and apathy. Fatigue and apathy lead to reduced activities. Reducing activities means less satisfaction and pleasure in life. More things will cause anxiety and low mood. And less satisfaction and pleasure leads to more depression, irritation and anger. If we experience more anxiety, that also leads to more depression. And boredom is the most common trigger for relapse, especially in addiction problems. And what we have control over here is activities. We have no direct control over how we feel, but we have control over what we do. And that by doing things differently that will no doubt create new mild to moderate negative feelings. But one of the essential things to realize is that the aim of therapy is not the avoidance of all suffering, but to teach our clients to have such exciting, interesting, fulfilling lives that they are worth suffering for. But if your life consists of watching reruns of Coronation Street on television and getting stoned out of your mind every night, if that's your life, then is that a life that's worth suffering for? So we need to teach our clients that suffering, pain is part of life, but by accepting some suffering in our life, we will achieve a lot more satisfaction and pleasure. This slide explains a little bit, if you want to talk to clients about changing what they do, what kind of questions we can ask. And the example is of a client who believes they are worthless and as a result of that avoid life. I mean, we can ask, in what situations in the past have you thought that you were worthless? What do you do next when you think you're worthless? Does your way of responding include a pattern of avoidance? What is the immediate effect of the activities that you do? Do they make you more comfortable? Do they make you feel less worthless? Do they think that you're less worthless? Does it stop you feeling or thinking something painful? What unintended effects does your avoidance have? What are alternative activities that you could choose if you think you're worthless? Keep this in mind here, keeping with your goals and valued directions, because we're going to talk about it later on. And if you achieve a goal, if you follow your goals, what kind of effect would that have on your life? So we need to talk about action and less about feelings. So we assist our clients in turning why or if only questions into how questions. If you feel worthless, how could you behave in a way that would lead to you thinking that you're less worthless? An antidote to depression and all that is a balanced life, doing stuff that gives pleasure, doing things that we're satisfied with, and that's basically a balance between shoulds and wants, and also a balance between all other opposites in life, passive, active, thinking, feeling. And we start always by monitoring. Have a look at this chart. You can see the 7 days of the week here and most of the waking hours of the day. And you can kind of adapt it if you need to. And what we ask clients to do is to monitor what they do with their life. So we want our clients to write in the bigger box, in 1 or 2 words, what was the main activity that you did in that hour. In the smaller column, we then would like to write them how much pleasure and satisfaction each of these activities gave you. P for pleasure, S for satisfaction. And we ask clients to use a 10-point rating scale. So 10 would mean an enormous amount of pleasure or satisfaction, and 0 or 1 not at all. So clients would write that in this small box. This is a bit tedious, so we ask clients to keep that for 1 or 2 weeks. Preferably write it down as soon as possible, connected to the actual activity. Don't complete a whole day at the end of the day, because then you're going by memory and not by what actually happened. So what we'll get if we do this for a week is that we have an idea about what activities or problems are avoided by the client. We also get an idea about how the client's level of pleasure and satisfaction is. In general, if people are complaining about depression, their pleasure and satisfaction levels will be quite low. If they're connected with anxiety, that they might have moments of higher levels of satisfaction and pleasure, but in general it will be on the downside because a lot is avoided. We can also use activity scheduling like this if we want in general for the clients to increase their activity levels. For instance, for a client who does hardly anything, just sits at home, plays video games, and that's all they do, we might include smaller activities that they could include, like going for a walk in the morning, or once a day going to the local dairy, and see what that brings. A major mistake in this is to rewrite the client's whole week in one go. The aim is to introduce small changes, building up the level of activity gradually towards the long-term goals. And days should not be filled with activity for activity's sake. So the client might keep the activity schedule just for 1 week, then we observe, we evaluate, and then we'll suggest in consultation with the client some small changes in the activity schedule, just to test the waters and see how the client can work with that. Activities we choose need to be related to things that the client has been avoiding and help them to act in accordance with their value directions. More about that later. It's important that the new activities are a mix of pleasure and satisfaction. Especially with clients suffering from depression, what you might find is that their first inclination will be to pack their days full of useful activities. Things that they feel that they've neglected, so they feel they need to make up for that, which is a pitfall. It needs to be a balance between pleasure and satisfaction, and days should not be completely filled up with activities. It's important to continue to monitor the effect of scheduled activities on pleasure and satisfaction. It's important to realize that the client's avoidance will not disappear all of a sudden. So it might be good to continue with the activity schedule, although not in a kind of complete format, but to ask the client to keep a record of the changes they've made. And sometimes we need to go into problem solving or role play when we think about specific activities that the client might do. There's another kind of columns about balance, like being alone and being with people, mind and body, things that you have to do and things that you want to do, things that are connected with productivity and things that's achieving nothing. So life needs to be a balance in all respects. To underpin this process, and in general, I would start to talk about this after I've worked with the basic activity schedule for 2 or 3 weeks. We've made some small changes in the activity pattern by having talked to the client. We also have learned a little bit about the client, what the client sees as important. And this is basically to introduce the client to values and to teach them that by living up to your values, that can really add a lot of kind of enthusiasm in the change process. Values are what we find meaningful and important, and these are different for different people. Values are important to explore because most of our goal-directed activity comes from a foundation of what is valued. If you value a healthy lifestyle, and a related goal might be exercise daily. We may value family and therefore choose to schedule time with them. And it's important the more our activities are in line with our values, the less likely it is that we will become depressed. Wishes and feelings are not values. Values are not internal states, how people treat us or specific things to achieve. For instance, valuing health, no one ever has been 100% completely healthy. So it's something we aspire to. So some of the common values are listed here. And it's good to have a discussion with the client about that and to perhaps select 3 or 4 of these that are really important for the client. A big pitfall is to get stuck with one value. For instance, a client might say, my family is really important for me. And then you look and their whole life consists of doing things for their family. So they're living up to only one value, which is bound to lead to misery and depression. So we have to gently challenge clients to include more values in their list of values that they would like to live up to. Once a client has defined values, we're asking the client to define value-driven activities. What are the things you can do that are linked with your values? And you need to keep records of that to monitor progress. There's a couple of obstacles to implementing behavioral activation. The most common obstacle is the individual's beliefs about avoidance. People tell themselves that they can only engage in a particular activity when they feel motivated or when they feel like it, which of course is nonsense. Depression, not feeling like it, is not paralysis. Even when we're not motivated, we can engage in activities. The solution to this is that we need to teach clients that they should act according to the plan or activity schedule, not according to how they feel at the time. And basic knowledge about this is that the longer we wait with engaging our activity, the longer we wait to get motivated, the less likely it is that we will become motivated. If necessary, the task should be done now, even when we don't feel motivated. Just doing it leads to differences in the way the individual thinks and feels, which in turn increases motivation and changes the way others respond to the person. When do we throw in the towel with behavioral activation? When the client does not complete any activity scheduling. Or when the client meets every activity change opportunity with a yes, but. Yes, I could go for a walk in the morning, but. Yes, I could join a sports club, but. When that happens on an ongoing level, we might go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, does this client buy into the model? And like I've said before, there's no shame in saying to a client, look, this CBT-inspired interventions works really well for people who believe that by changing their behavior, they can change their mood. You seem to be not really buying into this idea. That's okay. Perhaps you should try other avenues of achieving what you want, but not through CBT-inspired interventions. If people ask me then, well, what can I try then? I say, I don't know. This is what I know about. This is what I know works. You don't seem to buy into that. That's okay. But I can't advise you what to do else. What else to do? Okay, this was the second part of behavioral activation. Thank you for your attention.